Tendakai thought the love that she had with her husband in their home was enough, but when moon after moon she harvested pails of blood and tears, she looked for answers and discovered the curse that had haunted all the women in her bloodline and which tormented her now. Pineapple. A long time ago in a faraway land, two young people fell in love and married in a community where love was rare and marriages were mostly sanctioned through long-held family arrangements and dates old between families. So when Tendakai, the young woman, it had first been propositioned by Shingai, she had almost laughed it away because she knew there was no way a young man from a wealthy family like he was from would fall for a young woman whose father had passed without making a marriage pledge for her. Yes, their dalliance had started off as a joke. They had met early one morning, way before daybreak, as Tendakai was coming from the communal stream, balancing a clay pot of water atop her head and walking quickly home. She had always preferred to go to the stream early, way before everyone else had arisen and headed their livestock there and carried their washing there, just so she would get the cleanest water before it was muddied. She knew too that going early meant she would be able to finish the multitude of tasks placed on her by her stepmother way before her stepmother began to complain. But that morning, as she walked from the stream, she heard footsteps behind her, and heart pounding, she had increased her pace. The stream was slightly off the path of her village, and the path she had taken was secluded. She knew that if she screamed now, no one would hear her, no one would rescue her, and she knew that if the person behind her attacked her and left her for dead on the path, it would be a while since she was found. Yet even as she walked faster, she could hear the strides behind her coming closer and closer. She tried to run, but the clay pot on her head started to teeter, and knowing this was the best clay pot in her home, and knowing it was better for her stepmother, Mairufaro, that the clay pot returned home intact than she would return home alive, she stopped and waited for the silent, waited for a sickle to her throat, an arrow in her back, or a kettle whip on her shins. But the footsteps behind her slowed down too, and she felt the assailant draw closer and could feel his inhales and exhales behind her. And after a long, interminable wait, she sighed and said, "I don't have any gold with me. Please, let me be on my way. Please." Then the assailant had burst out laughing so hard, and Tendakai had recognized the voice instantly. It was Shingai, a boy from the kingdom she had grown up with, and with who, together with other children who were their friends, had played a multitude of pranks on each other as they had grown up. She did not know whether to fling the water she carried at him in anger or to join in the laughter with him. But in the end, she had simply turned to look at him and said, "You scared me, Shingai. I thought you were a robber." He must have seen the fear in your eyes, for he quickly sobered up and said, "I am sorry. I saw you as I was coming to check my trips." He raised two rabbits at her, "and I wanted to catch up with you. I am sorry I scared you." She looked at him, her eyes narrowed, the anger at having been pranked by something so real finally arriving. "Don't ever do that to me again, otherwise I will stop speaking to you ever." And she turned and stormed off, refusing to listen to him as he called out, "Wait, Tendakai, wait please, I am sorry. Please forgive me." That meeting had happened long back, when they were both 18 reigns old, and in the ensuing days after that encounter, Shingai had waited for her patiently every morning by the path to the stream, begging for forgiveness, and eventually Tendakai relented. "Of course I forgive you, but please don't do it again, to me or to the other girls. As young women, we are already going through a lot, and men scaring us shouldn't be seen as a joke." Shingai nodded, promising never to do it again. "In fact, I promise from now on that I will ensure you are safe during these ungodly hour trips to the stream. And from that day on, Tendakai had found him already waiting for her by the stream. Sometimes he would help her fill her clay pot with water. Sometimes he would carry the pot for her until they were almost in the villages, when Tendakai would ask him for the pots because she knew that if they were to be seen walking together often enough, a rumor would start that they were lovers, and she would never hear the end of her looseness from her stepmother. For my Rufaro was likely to assume that she had been the one to entice the poor young man who was way out of her league, just so that she, Tendakai, would get a good match. You shall never marry, my Rufaro had told Tendakai the day after Tendakai's father was buried. Your father never pledged a marriage between you and anyone else before he passed, and seeing that your real mother passed away at your birth, there is no one to marry you off in this kingdom and beyond. The stepmother finished cackling. At least I was clever enough to persuade your father to do some marriage pledges for my daughters. As for you, you will grow old with me here. Tendakai had quickly come to terms with her reality and had stopped daydreaming of the day she would marry. She had closed herself off to the possibility of finding a man and spent her days taking care of the homestead in the fields and ensuring that her younger sisters and brothers were well taken care of. In the late afternoons, she would visit her friends and they would exchange kingdom gossip or discuss weaving patterns or some cooking recipes before she had to return home to start preparing supper for everyone. Then her friends had started to marry and they became occupied with their new roles and did not have time to hang out with girls with no husbands because now their struggles were different. And before she knew it, Tendakai was the only young woman amongst her friends who was unmarried. So it was not surprising to her how, as time went on, her encounters with Shingai became the only highlight of her day. Every night before she fell asleep, she looked forward to spending time with him the following day. She looked forward to his never-ending repertoire of jokes and always found his booming laughter soothing and a great way to start her day, for she would carry the laughter with her all day long. She knew, though, that he was pledged to marry the daughter of the kingdom's goldsmith, but not once had she brought it up, afraid that she would remind him to marry and then lose the only friendship that she had. But one day, 3 rains into their morning meetings, 2 queer things happened, and these propelled the 2 into marriage. Firstly, that morning, Tendakai had found Shingai to be oddly tense, strangely quiet, something that was so unlike his usual exuberant self, and she admitted to herself that Shingai had been rather quiet for the past few moons. What is it? Tendakai asked tentatively as they walked side by side on the path, their feet wiping the dew on the grass to the sides. You have been awfully quiet. What is wrong? Already, she was preparing to hear him say that he would marry his pledged wife soon and they would not meet anymore. And already, too, she was prepared to swallow hard and tell him, "Congratulations, my friend. Go and do your best with your wife." But what Shingai said next astounded her, for he abruptly stopped walking, forcing her to stop walking too, and turn to look at him. "I have fallen in love with you, Tendakai," he said. "You are everything I want in a woman, and it will be a great delight for me to spend the rest of my life with you." Tendakai was stunned. This was not what she had expected. Of course, over the last 3 rains, she had come to feel deeply for him, but she had been quick to squash the budding feelings, for she had known that they would never be reciprocated. But now, this? How did he expect her to react honestly? He knew she knew that there was no chance of them getting together, so why would he say something like this? Did he want to hurt her? So she looked into his eyes and said sadly, "Friend, you know that's impossible for us. Please don't do that." And she had gently taken the clay pot from his hands, balanced it on her head, and said quietly, "Goodbye," before walking towards the village, vowing to herself that she would never visit the stream so early in the morning, so that she would never have to see him again. But unbeknownst to her, she would see him sooner than expected. For another strange thing had happened that day. Someone had seen them together, standing in the path, Shingai holding her clay pot for her, and Tendakai looking meaningfully into his eyes, and this person had run to the kingdom's market with it. The orphaned girl is cavorting with pledged young men, the rumor said. She is trying to destroy homes. And soon enough, it was whispered to as many people that Tendekai's stepmother, Mai Rufaro, had learnt of it too. Mai Rufaro had charged home from the market, bellowing Tendekai's name, and Tendekai, who was busy shelling peanuts, had jumped to her feet, rushing to meet her. "What is this I hear of you frolicking in the streets with the pledged man?" Amai Rufaro asked, shouting. "Have you no shame, or are you trying to bring shame to your sisters' reputations so that their pledges will turn back on them and you will all be unmarried, huh?" "What are you talking about, Amai?" Tendekai asked quietly and watched as Mai Rufaro picked a stone and aimed it at her. "Hey, pretending like you do not know that you have your clothes in the Mugute boy's face. Hey, the fact that you would even go to that young man is hysterical. You think that family will look at you with your poverty, with your parentless state, huh?" Tendekai wanted to deny it, for it was not the truth. Despite the declaration he had made this morning, Tendekai regarded him as a friend. So instead she just stood there and watched Mai Rufaro's fury increase as though firewood was being shoved underneath it. "I cannot allow you to stay here and disgrace the family name even further. You have to leave. Go, start your own home and be a disgrace there alone." For a moment, Tendekai simply stared at the older woman who had raised her with begrudging, hate, anger, dismissal, and starvation. They were not friends, and their father had never tried to bring them closer, but they were family, and Tendekai knew that this homestead was as much her home as it was Mai Rufaro's. So she simply widened her feet on the ground and wrapped her arms around her ribcage and said, "Go away. This is my home. I am not going anywhere." But Mai Rufaro would hear none of it and was shouting at the top of her voice, "Leave my homestead, Tendekai. I will not house a disgrace here. Besides, where have you seen a woman your age still in their father's home? I have tolerated you enough. Go." Tendekai remained adamant, speaking calmly and saying, "I am not going anywhere." By then, neighbors who had heard the melee had left their homes and their tasks to come and watch the arguers maul at each other, and bit by bit, spectators had filled the yard with others perching on treetops and rooftops to watch the intriguing fight. Tendekai could see too that Mai Rufaro held the upper hand in the argument, and the crowd was agreeing with Mai Rufaro that she, Tendekai, had enticed the young man, and she knew somehow that she would not win. So she sighed and said, "It is okay, Mai Rufaro, I will leave." And she turned to go into her hut, trying to fight the tears in her eyes and her mind asking her where they would be going. But she had not walked too far toward their hut when there was a sudden silence behind her. She turned to look, and there Shingai was, standing with his mother and his two sisters. "My child," his mother spoke, walking briskly to Tendekai, then went close, taking Tendekai's hands in his. "Oh, how nice it is to finally meet you. My son Shingai has spoken non-stop of you and of how he wants to marry you. But of course, he could not do so because of the pledge. Yesterday, though, we went to the family of his pledge and we paid reparations, offering a new pledge to the family, and we wanted to come here formally so we could notify the family of our intention to marry you, subject to you, of course, agreeing to marry him. But for now, we have heard the situation here at home is not okay for you, so we have come to offer you shelter. Once you are settled and can make decisions about the future you want, then we can come back and pay for your aura. Is that okay?" A rock that Tendekai had not even felt existed lifted miraculously off your shoulders, and the airways in your lungs and throat cleared, and she started to breathe lighter. Thank you, she said to Shingai's mother, her voice hoarse. Thank you for saying me, and of course I would be delighted to come and stay. But as she was quickly packing in her heart, Mairufaro had entered and whispered with maliciousness in her voice, "You think you are very clever, right? Wrong. You can never run away from your destiny, and like your mother who passed giving birth to you, you shall harvest only sorrow, and no bloom shall come out of your labor." Then she had walked away. Tendakai paid her no heed and went to stay in the Mugute household. For a moon, she nursed the painful wounds in her soul and allowed her body to rest. For the first time in her life, there was no demand for her to wake up too early or to spend the day on her feet slaving away. And two, she could now see Shingai in peace without looking around to see who was watching. Although the two were forbidden to spend time alone together by his mother and were always chaperoned by his sister, Tendakai found comfort in his presence. She could not help but wonder at how much he had matured. He was no longer the boy who had pranked her, teased her. He was the man who had grown into himself, who had found his voice, and who spoke positivity with it. And when he eventually told her again that he loved her and he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, Tendakai had opened her mouth and had surprised herself by admitting, "I love you too, Shingai, and I appreciate all you have done by being a present friend. I really would love to spend the rest of my life with you too." And the two held on tight to each other. A messenger was sent to Mairufaro that the Mugute family would be coming to pay bride price for Tendakai, and Mairufaro was asked to gather everyone for the ceremony. But on the day of the Roora, the Mugute family had found the gates to the homestead locked, with no one to negotiate Roora with. Shingai's family then had to seek an injunction from the king to allow for the ceremony to take place, and only after the arrival of the royal messenger had Mairufaro opened the gate. But Mairufaro had not invited everyone else, and during the negotiations, she sat in a corner of the hut, speaking only when necessary, and her face an image of disapproval and anger. But still, the cattle were headed into the family's pens, and the marriage was declared official. Tendakai and Shingai's marriage was a happy one. She was loved. He was loved. They spent all their free time together, and they built their home on the new plot of land granted to newlyweds by the king with their hands. Tendakai was also experiencing a mother's love for the first time in her life from Shingai's mother, and that made her even more secure in her marriage, in her home, in herself. But challenges started when the two of them failed to conceive. At first, both were not overly concerned. They had seen women falling pregnant a reign or two after marriage, and they both agreed to enjoy the time they were alone. They would go on long walks in the afternoon, holding each other's hands and drawing the attention of people who found their closeness odd and uncomfortable, as they had never seen a husband and a wife walk together so leisurely, let alone holding hands. They would wander into the forest and pick fruit which they would feed each other as they sat under the shades of trees or on boulders. And often they used the path from the stream that they had used back then, and they would laugh, remembering the old landmarks and their little symbolisms to them. But when, a reign later, Tendakai had continued to harvest blood each moon, she began to withdraw. She started to hate going out of her home because she knew that everyone she met would inadvertently avert their gaze to her flat stomach. She knew the more brazen ones would ask, in a tone that they would mask as concern, but where she could hear the jibes and mockery underneath. "And so when do you think you will bless the Mugute household with a child, seeing as you married the only child?" And that made her so insecure she started to avoid people. Yet it was your stepmother, Mairufaro, she was scared to come across the most, for the woman never failed to hide her glee, looking pointedly at the stomach before saying, "You did not get my blessing. How else did you think you would conceive?" Still no child came, and she had been married for 2 reigns. Maybe I am cursed, she told Shingai repeatedly. Maybe I was never meant to marry, since I never had a pledge and now the ancestors are punishing me for marrying. Shingai laughed and said, "What if it is me who has a curse?" Then more gently, he would take her hands into his and look into her eyes and say, "My love, I can see that this thing is eating you up. It should not, because childbirth is not in our hands, but in the hands of the Maker. Please, Tendekai, don't take this as a failure on your part. Let's keep trying, but also let's live our lives because this is the only chance we have." Still, that did nothing to quash her fears, and what was worse was that she learned through rumors that her stepsister Rufaro had married. And what was worse was that Tendekai had seen Rufaro once from a distance as Rufaro waddled across the road with a swollen belly. Tendekai had been pained and had decided to take matters into her own hands and gone to visit herbalist after herbalist. She had swallowed all bitter roots and all unknown powders, and still every moon she harvested blood. She tried to convince Shingai to go and see a seer who would help her find out if she had been cursed, but Shingai had adamantly refused, saying, "These people will feed off your fears and lie to you. They will separate you from your loved ones. Please, love, let it go. Please, be patient." But even though she did not go to see a seer, she could not let her barrenness go. When through the grapevine, she learned that Rufaro had lost her child at birth, Tendekai had at first sighed in relief because it meant that they were both at par, but had immediately berated herself for her callousness. Her infertility was not Rufaro's fault. She soldiered on, 5 rings in the marriage with no child, and some days were good, and some were not so good. Sometimes she would console herself, telling herself that it wasn't her fault, that she was not the only one in the world, and promising herself to ask Shingai to marry another wife so he could have children. And sometimes she would cry all day long, asking the Maker, asking her ancestors why it was she who did not have a child, what she had done to offend the ancestors, and what she had to do to make things better. But neither the ancestors nor her Maker seemed to have heard her, for her womb remained closed. 6 reigns into her marriage, things came to a head. Rufaro had been pregnant 2 more times, and 2 more times she had carried to full term, but then lost the babies. Tendekai had wanted to reach out to ask if the younger sister supposed to they carried a curse from their father's side of the family, but then she remembered that her and Rufaro had never been friends, and she would not know how to start the conversation with her. But there had been a baby welcome event in their village, and as was custom, once a newborn turned 3 moons old, the women of the community would turn up with gifts to see the baby, who would now be able to come outside for the first time. And there Tendekai saw Rufaro. She had been taken aback because the moment Rufaro saw her, the younger woman had stood and rushed to hug her sister, an affectionate exchange that had never happened between them ever. "Sissy," Rufaro said as she led Tendekai to a place next to hers on the reed mat, "I have wanted to visit you, but I wasn't sure whether you would receive me or not. I am glad you are here." At a temporary loss for words, Tendekai had remained momentarily stunned, then said, "You know you are always welcome. Please come sometime." Rufaro nodded eagerly as they sat, and once they had crossed their legs on the mats, she took Tendekai's hand again, clutching it as hard as though she were a child in a very large crowd. Tendekai was even more shocked when my Rufaro arrived, and Rufaro averted her gaze, refusing to greet her mother. Despite the apparent drama that was going on between mother and daughter, the event did not stop, and soon enough the baby was being passed around for the invited women to see and speak blessings over it. Tendekai could feel her stomach muscles tightening into a ball, as the last thing she wanted was to hold a baby when she herself had never held one that was hers. But she swallowed and took the baby and smiled at its beautiful chubby face and whispered, "Live long and prosper," before passing on the baby to Rufaro, who simply looked at her sister and shook her head. I can't take the child, Rufaro said, her voice somewhere between a half whisper and a half shout. Then she rose and ran away from the gathered crowd. Tendekai passed the baby to another woman and murmured her apologies before rising to go after his sister. She could also see Amai Rufaro rising, and together the two chased Rufaro, who ran until she reached their old home. Tendekai was panting, out of breath, when they got to the yard, but did not even get time to catch her breath, for there was someone in the yard, a strange, gnarly old man, wearing red robes and carrying a mirror and an earthenware pot. It was the Tsikamutanda, a witch hunter, known only for stepping into homes where witchcraft was practiced, and he nodded at Rufaro and said, "I am here, child. Let's sort this out." Amai Rufaro was the last to arrive, but the moment she had seen the Tsikamutanda, she had made as though to turn and flee. The gnarly old man had already seen her, however, and in a small voice that still managed to reverberate across the yard said, "Stop, woman, the pot has seen your face. Come closer and converse." By then, several people had followed from the event, and neighbors had started to gather to witness the free show. Amai Rufaro turned, then instead of going to the Tsikamutanda, turned to look at Tendekai and Rufaro. Then, as though in a trance, she spoke, looking directly at Rufaro. "I did not know that it would affect you too. When you had your first chill bath, I took the potions back to the Nganga who gave them to me, but I found that he had passed. Now I don't know what to do with it." "What potions, Amai?" Rufaro asked, her voice stoic. Tendekai saw the hesitation that passed through Amai Rufaro's face, but whatever trance she was in was stronger, so she said, pointing at Tendekai now, "It was your mother's fault. She knew I was the one pledged to your father, yet your family connived to have the pledge cancelled, and she married him instead. My own friend, conniving with her family." She clicked her tongue. "I just asked for a potion to make her unable to conceive, but the traitor was already pregnant, so the potion took her out instead. And still I went back and said to strengthen the potion for the daughter she passed giving birth to. I wasn't aware the potion would affect the ghost sisters too. If I had known before the Nganga passed away, I would have reversed it." When she fell silent, the Tsikamutanda spoke and said, "My Rufaro, please bring your potions." And she walked again, transfixed, into her heart and brought an earthenware pot which the Tsikamutanda took and threw into the fire, and everyone watched as its contents produced a black cloud of smoke, then a pungent smell before the fire sizzled down. Mai Rufaro's head jerked, and she looked as though she had just awoken, and she looked around, realized what had happened, and tried to shove her way out of the crowd. But the crowd was ready, and they pinned her down and began to chant, "Witch, witch, witch," as they dragged her to her feet and began marching her to the king's council. It was Tendekai's and Rufaro's turn to look at each other, and for the second time that afternoon, now both with tears in their eyes, the two young women reached out for each other and hugged. Tendekai only stepped out of the hug when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned. It was Shingai, and he was pulling her in her hug with both hands. He allowed her to sob on his chest, and when she quieted down, he whispered, "I am sorry you had to go through that." She looked up at him and said, "It won't have been easy without you, Shingai. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for not abandoning me. I pray that now the ancestors will open my womb and I will give you a gift." He smiled at her, "And even if they don't, know that I love you always." She smiled back, "I love you more." The end. Thank you for watching the story to the end. There are also many other African romance stories you can immerse yourself in here, and all you need to do is click the playlist above or browse the channel. Also, if you can, please do leave a like or a comment or a subscription. Bye for the meantime, and lots of love.